Welcome to While We Were Distracted, the podcast where we explore topics that often get overshadowed in the rush of daily life. Please take a moment to like and subscribe. It really helps.
Imagine getting a letter. It looks, pretty legitimate. And it says you're due a multi-million-dollar inheritance from some long-lost relative overseas. Sounds like a dream, right? Well, today we're doing a deep dive into a story where that exact dream turned into, well, a devastating nightmare for hundreds of unsuspecting people. Our source material for this is a pretty revealing press release. It's from the U.S. Department of Justice dated July 3rd, 2025, and it details the recent guilty plea of a Nigerian national. He was involved in this massive international fraud scheme, and it specifically targeted elderly U.S. citizens. So our mission today is to really unravel the complex web of this transnational scam, how it worked, its staggering impact, and also the crucial international efforts needed to bring these perpetrators to justice. We'll explore how this kind of scheme operates, what makes it so effective, and what it tells us about staying vigilant.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating here, I think, is how these schemes, they aren't just about simple deception, not just a quick lie. They use some pretty sophisticated psychological manipulation. They prey on hope, on fear sometimes, and it's all wrapped up in these intricate financial networks, really designed to obscure where the money is actually going. We're going to connect this to the bigger picture of transnational organized crime, and it really shows how critical global collaboration is in fighting back.
Okay, so let's unpack this then. The core of the scam, it involved these personalized letters.
Yeah.
What exactly did those letters claim, and how did they manage to, lure victims in?
Well, the letters were crafted very carefully. They were meant to look incredibly official, legitimate. They typically claim to be from, say, a bank representative in Spain. And they'd tell the recipient, hey, you're entitled to a multi-million-dollar inheritance.
Yeah.
This money, they'd say, was left by a deceased family member, someone who died overseas maybe years ago. The key was creating that immediate, really compelling hook, capping into that almost universal desire for a sudden windfall, right?
Right. And once they planted that initial seed of hope, what was the next step? Because it wasn't just offering money, was it? They pretty quickly started asking for payments.
Exactly. That's the pivot. Once a victim responded, showed interest, the fraudsters would then layer on this series of, elaborate lies. They'd fabricate a need for various payments, things like delivery fees, taxes, other administrative payments, all supposedly necessary before the inheritance could actually be released. And what's more, they'd often weave in these subtle threats, implying that if the victim didn't pay up, they might face questioning from government authorities.
So a bit of pressure there, too.
Absolutely. It's that combination. Promised reward on one hand, implied threat on the other. It creates immense pressure, and it can really cloud someone's rational judgment.
And it wasn't just straightforward money transfers either, was it? This is where it gets, I think, really insidious. The press release mentions a complex web of U.S.-based former victims who were actually used to collect the funds. How does that even work? How do they manipulate earlier victims into helping them?
Yeah, this is a particularly cunning psychological tactic. It's quite cruel, actually. The fraudsters would leverage the shame and the financial loss that previous victims had already suffered. They'd often convince these, let's call them first-round victims, that by helping process funds for another new inheritance, so basically receiving money from new targets and then forwarding it on, that they might somehow recover their own lost money, or maybe expedite their own supposed inheritance.
Wow. So exploiting the sunk cost fallacy.
Exactly. It traps them even further in the scheme, and it turns them, often unknowingly, into money mules. This also adds layers and layers to the financial network. It makes it incredibly difficult for law enforcement to trace the money directly back to the original perpetrators overseas.
And of course, the punchline is nobody ever got any inheritance money.
No. None of the victims who sent money ever received a dime of the promised funds. It was all smoke and mirrors.
The scale of this thing is it's shocking. We're talking about huge sums of money, hundreds of lives turned upside down. The DOJ press release says E is Lawrence Akimi. He's 41, a Nigerian national. He admitted to defrauding over $6 million from more than 400 victims. And crucially, many of them were elderly or otherwise vulnerable.
Yes, and that's a pattern we see often, unfortunately. It's a stark reminder of how these schemes disproportionately hit people who might be less familiar with online scams, or perhaps more trusting, or maybe just facing financial hardship or loneliness. Akimi specifically pleaded guilty back on June 17th. The charge was conspiracy to commit mail and wire fraud.
Okay, so that covers using the post, using electronic communications.
Precisely. Using those means to execute a scheme to defraud. And that charge carries a maximum penalty of 20 years in prison. So it really underscores the seriousness of the crime and, the commitment from law enforcement to go after these cases.
But Akemi wasn't working in isolation, right? This wasn't a one-man show. He was clearly part of something much bigger.
Absolutely. This specific case involving Akemi, it's actually the second one indicted that relates to this broader international fraud scheme. The investigation uncovered a much larger network, and so far 7 other co-conspirators have already been convicted and sentenced. And these individuals were operating from the UK, from Spain, and Nigeria, all part of the same operation.
That really highlights the global reach of this problem. It's not contained in one place. And you mentioned sentences. Have they been substantial? What kind of message does that send?
Oh, yes. They've been quite substantial. It shows the serious consequences these transnational criminals can face when they're caught. For example, Isenia Peter Nebo and Kennedy of Ponmosa, they were both extradited from Spain. Nebo got 128 months. That's over 10 years. Ponmosa got 97 months.
Wow.
Yeah. And then you have others extradited from the UK, like Emmanuel Samuel, Jerry Chucks Ozor, Ihayan Shuku, Jonathan Abraham. Their sentences ranged from 82 months up to 90 months. There was Okizi Bonaventure Ogbata, extradited from Portugal. He got 97 months. And even Amos Prince Oki Azema, who was paroled into the U.S. from Nigeria, he was sentenced to 90 months as well.
So serious time.
Definitely. These sentences send a very clear message, I think, about the international commitment to dismantling these kinds of criminal networks. It takes effort, but it can be done.
And that commitment is just so crucial, isn't it? Because these crimes, they just don't respect borders at all. Assistant Attorney General Brett Shumat emphasized that the Justice Department's dedication to pursuing and prosecuting these transnational criminals.
And what's really important to understand here is the level of collaboration required. It's incredible, actually. Acting Postal Inspector in charge, Vladimir Rojo, and also Acting Special Agent in charge, Ray Reid, they both highlighted just how critical that international cooperation was. Think about the challenges, right? You're tracking mail, tracking wire transfers across continents, you're navigating completely different legal systems for things like extradition, sharing intelligence effectively between agencies in multiple countries. It's a very complex dance.
It truly is. And this global effort, it involved this remarkable teamwork. You had federal agencies like the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, the USPIS, tracking the letters, then Homeland Security Investigations, HSI, the Consumer Protection Branch at Justice, the DOJ's Office of International Affairs, the U.S. Attorney's Office down in the Southern District of Florida was involved, the State Department's Diplomatic Security
A
Service.
huge list.
Yeah, and critically, they were working hand-in-hand with law enforcement authorities from the UK, Spain, and Portugal. It just shows the sheer resources and that intricate coordination needed to fight these borderless crimes effectively.
So, okay. What does this all mean for you, listening right now? We've sort of peeled back the layers on this international inheritance fraud scheme. It netted millions. It shows just how cunning, how far-reaching these operations can be. But also, importantly, the crucial efforts of global law enforcement working together to push back.
And I think this raises a really important question, doesn't it? In our world now, so connected, where information and misinformation travels instantly, how do we, as individuals, as a society, equip ourselves? How do we recognize and resist these kinds of sophisticated deceptions, especially when they target our most vulnerable populations? It's not just about knowing the facts of this case, it's understanding the psychological levers these fraudsters are always trying to pull. That's such a critical point. Because while this deep dive focused on one specific case, the methods will keep adapting. These fraudsters, they leverage new tech, current events. They're always finding new lures. So the key takeaway, I think, has to be a mix of things. Vigilance, definitely, a healthy dose of skepticism. And maybe most importantly, knowing where you can turn for help if something feels wrong. And if you or someone you know is age 60 or older and has potentially been a victim of financial fraud, there's help standing by. You can contact the National Elder Fraud Hotline. The number is 1-833-FRAUD-11. Let me repeat that. 1-833-372-8311. This is a U.S. Department of Justice hotline. It's managed by the Office for Victims of Crime. It's staffed by experienced professionals. They're available Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Time. And they have English, Spanish, and other languages available too. They provide personalized support, help you figure out the right agency to report to, and offer resources. It's a great starting point.
That's really valuable information.
Yeah. And there are other options too. Elder fraud complaints can also be filed directly with the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission. That's at reportfraud.ftc.gov, or you can call them at 877-FTC-HELP. And the Department of Justice also has more resources online through its Elder Justice Initiative webpage and also the Office for Victims of Crime website, which is www.ovc.gov. So let's end with this thought. As technology keeps evolving, right, opening new ways to connect, to do business, it inevitably opens new frontiers for deception as well. What new forms of fraud might we see emerge in the coming years? And maybe more importantly, how can we collectively foster a culture of awareness, of support, of critical thinking? How do we build something that protects everyone from falling victim to these kinds of scams?
Don't forget to like and subscribe for the next episode on While We Were Distracted.